This is the Wrestlebread Podcast, bringing you the latest news, recaps, and analysis of AEW and WWE. Get the unique perspective from a wrestling fan of over 25 years. Here's your host, Jaydee.
What's going on, guys? This is Jaydee here, and this is the first episode of the Wrestlebread Podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Let me give you a little bit of an intro of myself. My name is Jaydee. If my name sounds familiar, I was a guest on Julian's The Wrestle Court Podcast. Shout out to Julian. So I had a YouTube channel called The Kickout Show a couple of years ago. It was a parody. I made about 5 episodes of parodies of what's going on with wrestling. It was pretty good, but I couldn't be consistent with it, and I didn't want to half-ass it to people. So I decided to step away from it until I was able to get back to it. Was going to step to it again, but, life kind of got in the way. So I am now doing a podcast. So I've been watching, as you heard in the intro, I've been watching wrestling for over 25 years. I started watching wrestling back at SummerSlam 1992. I was 8 years old at the time. Little fact about my age. So my first birthday coincides with WrestleMania. So I am turning 35 years old 2 days after WrestleMania. So I always look at WrestleMania as a big thing because it always falls near my birthday. And I always look at it as a big celebration of wrestling, which is one of my favorite things in the world. So when I started watching wrestling, it actually came through my cousins. I have a lot of male cousins, and I was a bit of a tomboy when I was younger. So I was into Batman. I was into video games definitely too. So I was over at my cousin's house who lived in Jersey, and they were saying, "Oh man, SummerSlam's on." And I didn't know what the heck it was. They mentioned it was wrestling, so I actually thought that it was going to be like the college type of wrestling, which I felt was really weird because I didn't expect my cousins to be into that stuff. So they were talking about how it was already on, it was late, so they turned on the TV. Now this is 1992, so we didn't, of course, have the WWE Network. We had cable. And a lot of people in my family had what was called the chip. And when you have the chip in your cable box, that means you got every pay-per-view for free. So you'll see how that plays into my obsession with wrestling in a little bit. But they turned on SummerSlam, and the first match that was on was Macho Man versus Ultimate Warrior. Now, I told you I'm a tomboy, so I was into Batman, I was into superheroes, stuff like that. So when I saw the Ultimate Warrior and Macho Man, I was like, is this serious? This is real life right now? I was amazed. I didn't know what to expect. I was like, wow, it was kind of cool. So we sat and watched it. I didn't really know what to really think of it at first because I didn't understand the concept of what I was seeing, but I knew that I liked it. And so the next match was the Undertaker versus Kamala. And when I saw the Undertaker, I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is so cool. I, for whatever reason, thought I made the connection between him and Batman. Don't question it. I was 8 years old at the time. So when I saw The Undertaker, I immediately thought of Batman, who is my favorite superhero. And boom, my favorite wrestler right there was The Undertaker. And then we saw Bret Hart versus Davey Boy Smith. So it was pretty interesting. I don't recall really watching Survivor Series later on that year, but I do know that by the time Royal Rumble came around, I was watching it consistently. WrestleMania 9 was the first WrestleMania I saw, which a lot of people say is the worst WrestleMania they ever seen, but for whatever reason, I watched WrestleMania 9 and I stuck around with it. I sat there and I was like, okay, let's keep this ball rolling. And I kept watching wrestling for many years. I stopped watching it consistently, I would say back in 2003-ish. So a quick confession. I don't have a lot of friends that watch wrestling. The two cousins that put me into wrestling eventually stopped watching it, but I was watching it every Monday night. I was watching when SmackDown came around. I was watching the 4 big pay-per-views before In Your House came around, and there were monthly pay-per-views. So I was in it deep. I made, because I had the free cable, the free pay-per-view, I made my own tapes, VHS tapes. If you don't know what a VHS tape, please Google it. But I made my own VHS tapes. I of course made VHS tapes of The Undertaker. I probably had like 2 of them. I made a VHS tape of Shawn Michaels. I made, of course, recorded all the WrestleManias. I recorded most of the In Your House pay-per-views. My brother's ex-wife, who was his wife at the time, took me to my first pay-per-view, which was In Your House Mind Games in Philadelphia. I went to WrestleMania 30. I went to Raws. I went to, I think it was Money in the Bank at the time. I wasn't quite sure. It was a pay-per-view. I think it was a Money in the Bank pay-per-view. It was definitely in Philadelphia in July. And then most recently went to one of the most recent Raws in Philadelphia too. So I'm a big fan of wrestling. But I stopped watching it consistently around 2003, 2004, because it's nice watching wrestling when you're like 8, 12, 16 years old, 18 years old. You know, people are like, oh, you know, you watch wrestling. Okay, cool. But once you start hitting your 20s and you're a female, you kind of hit that point in your life where people are like, oh, you watch that. So I was slightly embarrassed. I wasn't really at my mom's house like that, so I didn't really get the free pay-per-view. So it was either go back to my mom's house or want to spend like $50, $60 to watch a pay-per-view, which wasn't happening. Plus, around that time, WWE had purchased WCW and ECW. And of course, me being from Philadelphia, I did watch a little bit of ECW. And when I found out that they brought out both of those promotions, I was like, man, I ain't watching this anymore. I felt as though it was like a monopoly and that nothing good was going to come out of it. So that was another reason why I stopped watching it consistently. But I always kept up with the pay-per-views, always kept up with the WrestleMania, especially with The Undertaker. So I didn't watch a lot of the Raw and SmackDown moments, but I always kept up with the pay-per-views. I played some of the wrestling games, of course. The last wrestling game I believe was 2014 or 2K16 maybe, but that's the story of how I got into wrestling. Oh, and the reason why I came back is because the love of my life found out he's also a wrestling fan. He really got into wrestling hard during the Ruthless Aggression era, and that was actually the period of time where I stopped watching it consistently. He found out I liked wrestling. I was slightly embarrassed about it, and he encouraged me to, if you like wrestling, you like wrestling. Screw what everyone else feels and thinks. So I started to watch wrestling. He took me to, we went to a Raw together, and that's when I really started to get back into it consistently. He took me to WrestleMania 30 on my 30th birthday, which was really special because that was the Ultimate Warrior's, one of Ultimate Warrior's last appearances, and I was actually at the Raw after Mania where it was his last appearance. So it was bittersweet for my wrestling fan journey to come full circle. So enough about me. Let me give you a little bit of this podcast, the Wrestlebread Podcast. The reason why it's called Wrestlebread, I originally wanted to call it the Kickout Show, but I wanted to keep it separate from the YouTube channel. I didn't want people to think that it's going to be a parody. I'm going to throw in some jokes in there, of course, but I didn't want you guys to think I'm not serious about this, because I watch wrestling. I watch every Raw, every SmackDown now. I watch all the pay-per-views. Been watching wrestling consistently for past, 10 years now. So it's my passion. So I like it. I don't want people to think I'm not being serious. And you also heard that I am covering WWE and AEW. So the reason why I'm covering AEW as well is because I feel as though it could be something special. I like the fact that there is competition out there, because the last time WWE had actual competition, it was the Attitude Era. They threw, the strict creative process out of the window, and the wrestlers had more creative control over what they were doing. And a lot of things, there were a lot of great moments that came out of that era. And I feel as though if WWE once again have competition, that they'll step their game up, because when there's no competition, you tend to get lazy. And another reason why I'm covering AEW is, so confession, please do not hit the unsubscribe button right now, but I never followed the indies. As long as I've been watching wrestling, I haven't really followed the indies like that. I was loyal to WWE. Now, not saying that I don't know who people are. I know who Kenny Omega is. I know who the Young Bucks are. I actually went to a couple of House of Hardcore shows of Tommy Dreamers and watched them actually wrestle. I didn't know who Nakamura was before he came to WWE. So when I heard people going crazy about him, I did look him up on YouTube. I saw one of his entrances at Wrestle Kingdom, and I watched him versus AJ Styles, who I knew before he came to WWE. And so I know who people are. Like, I don't know who Adam Page is. There's people that I don't know who they are. So I like the fact that AEW are going to bring these people to an audience, and to people like me who stuck to WWE and will like to have the options. But, I didn't watch the indies like that because I felt as though I didn't have enough time to dedicate to it, which is kind of weird to say because I'm about to dedicate like 60 hours to WWE for this WrestleMania weekend. But I just didn't have the resources. I don't know. I just didn't have the feeling to watch it. I know that now New Japan and Ring of Honor have weekly television shows. I did catch some TNA, of course. I watched WCW, so I knew a lot of the people who were in WCW. I watched some ECW, of course, but consistently, it was like 99% WWE. So I hope that, there's some people out there who may not know the indies like I do, or people who know the indies and are interested in hearing a unique perspective of someone who watched WWE mainly for so long to not know who a lot of people are, and to get the unique perspective of seeing something different. I have watched the Road to Double or Nothing. I think that the stories that they're telling are so great. One of the wrestlers, Britt Baker, is a dentist in real life, and she's wrestling, which I think is awesome. There's another wrestler who stepped away from wrestling, had a family, and decided to come back to it. So, it's very different. And I like the fact that they're creating something, specifically for the wrestlers, for the fans. Like, it's not a whole corporate thing, which I dig. So we'll see what happens with AEW. I wish them success, definitely. I hope that they can give WWE competition, but let's take it one day at a time. Let's let the process flow. Don't expect them to go toe-to-toe with WWE right away, because they have to build up on their own. I can't wait to watch Double or Nothing, and to see the following shows after that to see what they present. So hopefully, I've been talking for like the past 15 minutes about myself and about Wrestlebread and what to expect from it. So I hope that you guys get on this journey with me and we talk about, the breaking news of AEW and WWE. And I won't strictly just stick to these two companies. If there's something that happens in Ring of Honor or New Japan or Impact or anywhere else that, is really big news or breaking news or interesting, I will talk about it. But the main focus is on AEW and its developments and WWE. So make sure you hit the subscribe button to get on this journey with me, find out how I feel when I see a lot of these wrestlers for the first time at Double or Nothing. I keep wanting to say WWE because I know a lot of people mistakenly say double E. So all the people that I'll see at Double or Nothing, my perspective of what's going on at WWE. You'll hear my predictions for WrestleMania and NXT TakeOver. You'll hear my top 5 Mania moments of all time. And you'll also hear different aspects of wrestling that I'll talk about. I'll be talking about my experience at live events. We'll also talk about a whole different number of topics. So this is going to be a short episode because I'm just here to introduce myself and the podcast. So hit the subscribe button, please. You can find me on Twitter at Jaydee Talks, Jaydee Talks. Follow the podcast at Wrestlebread. Make sure you also, once the episodes start coming out, make sure you leave reviews. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you want me to cover different things, topics that you want to hear about. Because, I'm doing this to connect with the wrestling community. I love connecting to people on Twitter. When I watch Raw or SmackDown or any of the pay-per-views, I always connect to people on Twitter. I get on to Julian's podcast from time to time and talk there. So you'll see me around and connect with me, guys. Peace.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Check us out at wrestlebread.com.